Welcome to FolkFear, where the wind never forgets the names of the dead, and every village has a secret it dares not say aloud. Here we gather by candlelight to listen, to stories stitched into the soil, to lullabies that rot in the throat, to spirits that were never truly laid to rest. These are not just tales, they are warnings, passed from trembling lips to listening ears, about cursed cradles, haunted veils, and rites best left unspoken. So hush the world outside, and let the shadows tell you what they remember. You've entered FolkFear, and in these stories, the dead are always hungry. The fog came early in Sutlung, curling down from the mountains like a long breath exhaled from the mouth of the ancient forest. It was a quiet village, almost too quiet, a place where even the dogs no longer barked at night, and the birds seemed to forget to sing in the dawn mist. The bamboo grove swayed without wind, and the wooden chimes tied to old doorways stayed still, as if listening for something beneath the hush. Lan stepped off the rickety cart just before sunset, her boots sinking into the damp red soil. She adjusted the satchel over her shoulder, heavy with dried roots and herbs, and inhaled the familiar scent of wet earth and burnt straw. Home, or what was left of it. It had been 15 years. No one had written, no one had called for her, but something had tugged at her, a weight behind her ribs, a dream faint but persistent, of crying in the night and the sound of milk dripping onto wooden floors. She didn't recognize the man steering the ox cart, but he knew her name. "Back for the dead or the dying?" he asked, not unkindly. Lan gave a polite smile. "Just passing through." He didn't answer. He topped the oxen with a switch, and they continued their slow, plodding path into the fog. She stood at the edge of the village, a line of houses, dark-eyed and crooked, slumped together like old women mourning something they couldn't forget. Her childhood home was no longer standing, burned down during a fire that swept through the village when she was 13. She remembered the heat, the screaming, her aunt pulling her by the wrist into the river's shallows. But that was not the house she had come for. She made her way to the cottage on the hill. It was still there, bent with age, overgrown with vines, its wooden slats blackened with mildew and age. No one lived in it. They never had, after her aunt passed. And yet, someone kept it clean. The porch swept, the grass trimmed. A bowl sat at the threshold, chipped and stained white, as if once filled with milk. Lan's breath caught. She didn't believe in ghosts. Not really. But she believed in grief, in longing, in the kind of ache that could bend the laws of what was possible. She reached out and touched the doorframe. The wood was cool under her fingers, and then she heard it. Rock, creak, rock, creak. A cradle, somewhere inside. She pulled her hand back as if burned. At the village tea shop where widows gathered in silence and the young had stopped being born, Lan sat on a short stool and listened. They spoke in murmurs, always watching her from the corner of their eyes. Her presence stirred old mud. "You're Mai's niece, the one who left," one finally said, lips pursed. "You shouldn't have come back." "Why not?" The woman didn't answer, but another leaned in, her voice hoarse with age. "She's still here, you know, waiting for the child to cry." "The Milk Mother," another whispered. The name rolled off her tongue like a curse. Lon didn't flinch. "Tell me." They looked at each other. One spat into the ashes of her brazier. "Your aunt never gave birth, but there was always milk, bowls of it, left out at night, gone by morning. Some say she was cursed, others say she asked for it. There was a boy, a stillbirth, tiny thing, didn't even cry, but she kept feeding it." Lon stared down at her tea. The leaves had curled like sleeping insects. "And the cradle?" she asked. They didn't answer, but one of them crossed herself, not with any known religion, but the old way, a diagonal mark across the chest, ending over the heart. "You're sleeping in that house?" one said, almost a hiss. "Don't. That child has no face, only a mouth, always hungry." That night, Lon unpacked her things by candlelight in the old cottage. The hearth was cold, but the air felt thick, as if the fire had just gone out. She sat in the main room where the floor groaned with memory. Her satchel rested beside her. Inside were jars of powdered lotus seed, dried motherwort, and old family recipes, but no charm, no root, no herb could ease the heaviness in her chest. She lit another candle and placed it near the corner of the room. There, against the wall, sat the cradle. It hadn't been there before. She was certain of it. The wood was gray with age, curved gently like arms in prayer. No blankets, no toys, just an empty cradle. But it moved. Rock, creak, rock, creak. Lon didn't speak. She didn't scream. Instead, she walked to it, knees trembling, and gently placed a finger on the edge. The rocking stopped, but the air was still full of something unsaid, like the last note of a lullaby left hanging in the air. She whispered, without knowing why, "Sleep, little one." Behind her, the candle flickered. From the doorway, outside the threshold, came the sound of milk dripping onto the earth. The next morning, the fog lifted just enough to let in a dim, colorless light. It bled through the bamboo slats and turned the walls of the cottage into a pale, breathing gray. Lon woke to the faint sound of water dripping somewhere nearby, but when she rose, she saw no leak, no roof crack, no broken jar, only the damp stains on the wooden floorboards that seemed to form a trail leading to the door. She opened it, and there, at the threshold, sat a bowl. Old, chipped, the same one from the night before, half full of milk. Only now, the surface was disturbed, rippling, as if something unseen had just drunk from it. Lon crouched, her shadow falling over the white liquid. It smelled faintly sweet, faintly rotten, and something else, human almost. She closed the door quietly behind her. Outside, the air was heavy. The villagers were already awake, but none looked toward her cottage. They pretended it didn't exist, that it was part of the fog, part of a story that had ended long ago. Only an old man walking past with a basket of coals made the sign across his chest and muttered, "Don't answer the cryin' girl. It never stops." Lon watched him go, her skin crawling beneath his words. She tried to focus on her work, on sorting herbs, lighting incense, and cleaning the cracked shelves. But the cottage resisted her. Every motion stirred up dust that felt too warm, too aware. Every corner whispered something she couldn't quite hear. And then, just before noon, she found the first thread of white hair. It was long, impossibly long, wrapped around one of the beams above the hearth. At first she thought it belonged to her aunt, whose hair had once been that same ghostly color. But when she touched it, it was slick, wet, like it had been soaked in milk. She tried to burn it, but the flame only hissed and went out. As night fell, the village retreated indoors like a body curling inward against a wound. No laughter, no talk, no clinking of dishes, only shutters closing. Lon lit her candles and brewed herself a tea of wild ginger and rice stem. The warmth steadied her hands, but not her thoughts. The cradle was still in the corner, untouched, unmoving now. Yet every time she turned her head, she swore it shifted, just slightly, as if breathing. She placed her journal beside her and began to write. The villagers call her the Milk Mother. They say she still feeds something, a child, a spirit, I don't know, but the offerings remain. If it is my aunt, I must understand why she never stopped. The ink bled on the page, spreading like veins. She looked up. The candles had dimmed, and the air felt thick, pressed in by silence. Somewhere outside, an owl screeched, a single broken note. Then she heard it. A lullaby, faint, wavering, sung by no voice she could name. It came from beyond the door, through the walls, through the fog itself, a melody as old as the soil. Lon rose slowly, the floor creaking beneath her bare feet. Her candle flickered wildly as she neared the window. Outside, the moon hung low and thin, a sickle cutting through the fog. And beneath it, just at the threshold again, the bowl. This time, it was full. Milk, fresh and steaming as though poured seconds ago. Lon's breath trembled. She opened the door. The air outside was still, dead still. Not even the bamboo leaves stirred. She whispered into the fog, "Who are you feeding?" Something shifted near the base of the steps, a small sound like fabric dragging on wet wood. She froze. She couldn't see it clearly, but the outline was there, small, crouched, unmoving. The fog pulsed faintly around it, like breath. And then the lullaby started again. Closer now. Inside her head, not outside. Drink, my darling, the moon is pale, the night is kind. Her knees weakened, her eyes burned, her mouth went dry. The bowl trembled once, then spilled itself over. Milk seeped into the earth, darkening it. The thing in the fog was gone. Lon backed inside, slamming the door shut. The sound echoed through the hollow house like a bell struck underwater. For hours she sat awake, candle in hand, until the wax ran out. The lullaby never returned, but when dawn came, she found the bowl upright again, and beside it, tiny footprints, pressed in milk, leading away from her door toward the woods. That day, she went to the village elder. Old Mistress Han sat by her fire, eyes clouded like pearls, her skin folded like bark. She said nothing for a long time as Lon spoke. When she finished, the old woman stirred the coals with a poker and said, "You shouldn't have touched the door." Lon frowned. It was open. No, not the door of wood, the door of listening. "You heard the song, didn't you?" Lon hesitated. "Yes." The old woman nodded slowly. "Then she knows you now." Lon's throat dried. "Who?" "The one who feeds the dead." Mistress Han leaned closer, her voice rasping like the crack of old paper. "When famine came, your aunt made a promise. She offered her milk to a spirit child in exchange for warmth, for the harvest to survive. But such things never end cleanly. The child took root in the house, in her bones, in her sleep. Now it waits to be fed." Lon shivered. "Why milk?" The elder looked at her with pity. "Because milk is life, and life is the sweetest lie the dead can taste." That night, Lon sealed the door with salt. She placed her herbs along the windowsill, mint for truth, sage for silence, mugwort for dreams. She thought it would be enough. It wasn't. At midnight, the lullaby returned, but this time it came from inside, from the cradle. Rock, creak, rock, creak. Lon turned slowly. The candlelight fluttered over the curved wood. Something small and pale moved within, a shadow rising, sitting up. Her mouth went dry, her voice barely a whisper. "Who's there?" Silence. Then the cradle stopped moving. Lon took one step closer, her breath caught between heartbeats. She reached out a trembling hand toward the empty air above the cradle's rim. Her fingers brushed something cold, a breath, a tiny sigh. She stumbled back, her heart slamming against her ribs. The candle guttered, the flame pulling sideways as if drawn by unseen lungs. And then, in the darkness, she saw it. A faint white mist curling up from the cradle's hollow, glowing faintly under the thin moonlight leaking through the slats. The shape of a small face, soft and unfinished, and the sound, faint but unmistakable, of a child swallowing. Lon ran from the cottage barefoot into the fog, the air biting her throat. She didn't stop until she reached the river that cut through the village. Its black waters reflected the shivering moon. She fell to her knees, trembling, gasping for breath. Behind her, in the distance, the lullaby continued, faint but clear, carried by the wind, not sung by a voice, but hummed by the earth itself. "Drink, my darling, drink though the breast is dry." Lon pressed her hands over her ears, but even then, she could still hear it inside her. Lan stayed away from the cottage for 2 days. She rented a corner room at the tea house, pretending to be just another wanderer passing through. But she could still feel the house watching her, not through walls or windows, but through the fog itself. The mist seemed to thicken whenever she tried to sleep, pressing against the shutters, whispering softly, like breath against her ear. By the third night, she could no longer rest. She went back. The path to the cottage was choked with weeds that brushed against her calves like ghost fingers. A dozen steps before she reached the door, she stopped. The bowl was there again, full of milk, perfectly white, faint steam rising into the night air. Lan crouched, the surface quivered. For a moment she thought she saw something reflected in it, a pale face, open-mouthed, eyes like hollow moons. She blinked. The image was gone. She lifted the bowl and felt its warmth. It wasn't from her. It wasn't from this world. That evening, the old women at the tea shop told her the rest. It began during the famine, they said.
the year when even the rice husks were boiled to paste and mothers learned what grief tasted like. Lan's aunt, Mai, was newly widowed then, young, beautiful, with no children. She had prayed for one every night by the small shrine near the well. One morning a crying sound echoed from the fields, thin, weak, the sound of something struggling to stay alive. Mai followed it, heart hammering. She found a baby lying beneath a tattered blanket, skin gray, lips cracked, too small to survive. No one claimed it, no one wanted it. It was already cold when she picked it up. But Mai refused to believe the child was gone. She brought it home, wrapped it in her shawl, and sat by the hearth all night whispering to it. When morning came, the villagers saw smoke from her chimney for the first time in weeks. She told them the baby had cried again, softly, faintly. They didn't believe her. But each night after that, she left out a bowl of milk, and every morning it was empty. As the women spoke, their voices dropped lower until they were almost whispering. One of them, her hands wrinkled like dried leaves, said, "She was warned. The dead should not be fed. But grief is a kind of hunger too, isn't it?" Lan listened, her fingers tightening around her cup. The fire crackled softly beside them. "What happened to her?" Lan asked. "She stopped coming to market. She stopped eating. They said her breasts filled with milk that never dried dry. Her skin went pale, her eyes hollow. She spoke less and less, only humming lullabies. And one night, the cradle began to rock by itself." The woman fell silent, staring at her reflection in the tea. Then, barely above a breath, she added, "When they found her, she was smiling. Her hands were clasped over her chest, empty. But her lips were stained white." Lan swallowed hard. "And the baby?" The woman made the old sign over her heart. "No one ever found it." That night, the rain came without warning. Lan lit 2 candles and watched their flames tremble. The air was heavy with the smell of wet soil and decay. She told herself she would stay awake until dawn, just to prove she wasn't afraid. But as the storm deepened, fatigue crept in. Her eyelids sank, heavy as stone. She dreamed. In the dream, she stood in her aunt's cottage, only now it was bright, warm, alive. A young woman hummed by the hearth, her long hair falling over her shoulders. A baby slept in her arms, swaddled in faded blue cloth. Lan could smell the sweetness of milk and hear the gentle rhythm of rocking wood. Then the woman turned toward her. Her face was blurred, as if smudged by tears. But her eyes were sharp, dark, full of knowing. "He was hungry," she whispered. "Would you have let him starve?" Lan's throat closed. "He's gone, Aunt Mai." "No, not if I keep him fed." And then the baby in her arms began to move. It wasn't crying, it was drinking. The sound, soft, wet, insistent, echoed through the dream until it became unbearable. Lan wanted to scream but couldn't. When she looked again, the cradle was empty and the woman was gone. Only the sound remained, a faint sucking noise, growing louder, closer. Lan woke with a jolt. The candles had gone out. The air was ice cold, and from somewhere beneath the floor, she heard the unmistakable sound, the slow, deliberate rhythm of something being fed. Rock, creak, rock, creak. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. She only listened, heart hammering. Then from the far corner of the room, a small sigh arose, a baby's breath, impossibly close. Lan grabbed her satchel and fled into the night. She didn't stop running until she reached the far end of the village where the temple ruins stood. There, among crumbling stones and half-buried altars, she collapsed to her knees. The moon was high now, pale and bloated, bleeding faint light over the wet earth. A monk once tended this temple, long before the famine. The villagers said he vanished after the hunger years, that he refused to bless the offerings of milk Mai brought him, saying they reeked of the grave. Lan whispered into the night, "If you're still here, please tell me what she did." No voice answered, but a soft wind stirred, curling around her like an unseen hand. It carried a faint scent, not incense, not rain, but milk, spoiled, cloying, sweet. Then beneath the shrine she saw it, a patch of soil, pale as bone, where no grass grew, and on it small handprints pressed deep into the mud, as if something had crawled out or was trying to return. Lan stepped closer. The ground pulsed beneath her bare feet, once like a heartbeat. She knelt, her fingers trembling, brushing the surface. The soil was warm, and from beneath it came a faint sound, the soft rhythm of swallowing. Lan staggered backward, her breath breaking into fog. The handprints glistened in the moonlight, wet, fresh, alive. A cold wind rose suddenly, whispering through the ruined temple like a voice from a broken throat. The old prayer flags shivered violently, as though trying to flee their poles. Lan heard a sound behind her, a cry of a child, thin, hungry, echoing from everywhere at once. Then came a woman's whisper, "He must not go hungry." Lan turned and saw her aunt, standing in the moonlight, hair streaming white, eyes empty. Her face was serene, too serene, lips parted in a gentle smile. In her hands she carried a bowl full of steaming milk, but as she lifted it toward Lan, the milk began to darken, swirling from white to gray to black. Lan backed away, shaking her head. "You're not real." "He is still hungry," the apparition said softly. "You hear him too, don't you?" The child's cry rose again, distant but growing closer. It seemed to come from the soil, from the air, from Lan's own chest. Lan fell to her knees, covering her ears. "Stop it!" But the voice, her aunt's voice, was calm, almost tender. "Once you feed a ghost," she said, "it never forgets the taste." And with that, the apparition faded. Only the bowl remained, resting in the mud, its surface rippling. Lan stared at it, unable to move. Then, from somewhere deep within the earth, she heard it again, the slow, deliberate rhythm of something being fed. The dawn found her still kneeling before the ruined shrine, her eyes hollow, her lips trembling. Behind her, the fog crept down the hill, curling around the trees like pale fingers. And from within that fog, faint and rhythmic, came the sound of a cradle rocking. Rock, creak, rock, creak. Lan did not return to the village tea house. By dusk, she found herself once again standing in front of the cottage on the hill. The door had been left slightly ajar, not by her, not by wind, but as if waiting for her to step inside. She hesitated on the threshold. The bowl was gone, but a faint trail of pale liquid shimmered in the moonlight, leading from the doorstep across the wooden floorboards, disappearing into the kitchen beyond. She followed it. Inside, the air was thick with a strange humidity, as though someone had boiled milk in a sealed room for hours. The smell clung to her skin, sweet, sour, warm. Her footsteps echoed as she walked, and with each creak of the floor beneath her boots, it felt less like wood and more like breath. The house wasn't just old, it was waiting. She entered the kitchen, and there, arranged in a dusty corner, she found the remnants of something long forgotten but recently disturbed. A circle of dried petals, 2 broken spoons, a baby's sock, browned with age but still soft, and a bundle of silk cloth stained with pale white crusts. Offerings. Lan knelt beside them and reached out, hesitating before she touched the cloth. It was still warm. And beneath it she felt a lump, small, dense, wrapped tightly in more fabric. She unfolded it, hands shaking. Inside was a rattle made from a bird's bone, painted with faded red dye. It trembled in her grasp as if something inside it still remembered joy. But as she tilted it, she realized the sound it made wasn't from rice or seeds. It was teeth. Tiny, milk white, filed smooth. Lan dropped it. It rolled across the floor and fell silent. She backed away. And then the floor creaked again, not from her weight, but from underneath. She crouched, her fingers tracing the lines of the wooden boards. One was cracked near the hearth, the grain of the wood darkened and warped. She pressed her palm against it, and the board dipped slightly, loose. Heart hammering, she retrieved a knife from the counter and wedged it into the seam. The plank came up with a groan like an old throat clearing. Beneath, darkness. Lan leaned in, breath shallow, eyes adjusting. What she saw was not quite a grave, not formally, no stone, no urn, no ceremony. But the dirt below was sunken, shaped as if something small had once been gently pressed into the earth. She could see the remnants of old silk, yellowed and clinging to what might have been bone. No coffin, no markers, just the kitchen floor above it. A burial where a mother could cook and sing lullabies while feeding something that never fully left. She reached down with trembling fingers, brushing aside loose soil. It was soft, wet, still moist with something that was not rain. As her hand touched the bundle beneath, a cold pressure gripped her wrist, not tight, not violent, but undeniably real. She gasped and pulled back, but when she looked again, nothing was there. Only the rattle lay on the floor beside her, still trembling. That night, Lan stayed in the house. She did not light candles. She did not sing, but she watched the grave. From the corner of the room, she watched as the pale mist rose again around midnight, first as vapor, then as shape, then as memory. A woman bent over the floor, a child cradled in her arms. The woman, her aunt, hummed something without sound. Then she turned and looked straight at Lan. "You found him." The vision whispered with a voice that moved like steam. "You dug him up. He wasn't ready." Lan's lips trembled. He's still here." Her aunt nodded, her smile fragile. She lifted the bundle to her shoulder. The cradle appeared again beside her, rocking gently without hands. "He needs to be fed." Lan took a step forward, her eyes fixed on the small shape in her aunt's arms, but then her breath caught. The child's body shifted, too long, too thin. The head tilted backward, and from beneath the cloth, a mouth opened. No eyes, no nose, just a wide, gaping mouth, and from within, the sound of milk being swallowed. Lan screamed. The vision vanished. She awoke at dawn, curled in the corner, drenched in cold sweat. The cradle was still, the grave beneath the kitchen sealed, but on the table, warm and full, was a bowl of milk, and floating on its surface, a single tooth. Later that day, she visited the abandoned schoolhouse at the village's edge. Inside, she found stacks of crumbling ledgers, birth records, attendance logs, forgotten names. She searched for her aunt's records. There were none. No marriage, no birth. But she did find one wine almost faded into the yellowing paper. Unregistered infant, recovered from outer field. Status, deceased, no burial license. She turned the page. Nothing. But in the margins, someone had written a line in pencil, almost too faint to see. Milk spoils when the child won't sleep. She left the building with her skin crawling. That evening, she stood in the kitchen again, staring down at the cracked floor. She whispered, "Who are you?" The house answered with silence, but in her mind, the lullaby returned, gentle, soft, pulling. She hummed along without meaning to. The cradle rocked, and from beneath the floor, she heard it again, a faint scraping sound, like small fingers brushing wood. Midnight had a particular stillness in Sulong. It wasn't the silence of sleep, but of something watching, waiting. Lan sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor. No candles, no fire. Only the thinnest thread of moonlight crept through the slats in the ceiling. The grave beneath the boards lay beneath her, hidden again by loose planks. And on the floor between her palms sat a warm bowl of milk, steaming gently. She had boiled it herself this time, poured it with shaking hands, not out of belief, but because part of her needed to know what would come if she offered it willingly. The cradle stood in the far corner, empty, for now. Lan kept her breath slow, steady. The smell of milk clung to the air, sweet, cloying, and faintly sour. The clock on the wall, rusted and still ticking, clicked softly as the minute hand reached 12. Then, the sound began. First, a creak, low and long from the rafters above. Then, a cold breeze that whispered through the space between the wall and floor. And then, without any footstep, any door, any wind, a figure sat down by the hearth. Lan hadn't seen it appear. It was simply there. A woman. Or something like one. She sat cross-legged, exactly where her aunt used to sit, her spine straight, her hair long and colorless, hanging like damp threads. She wore no expression, no anger, no grief, no peace, just stillness. Her arms were curved forward in the cradle of her lap, but they held nothing. Still, she rocked them gently, as if soothing a weightless child. Lan did not move. The bowl between her palms trembled. Then, the figure turned her head. Not all the way, not sharply, just enough that Lan could see her profile. The cheekbones were high, her lips slightly parted, and white, as if smeared with milk. She reached out, and without touching the bowl, she lifted her empty hands. Something unseen passed from Lan to her. The bowl remained, still full, yet Lan felt the weight leave her hands. The spirit woman raised nothing to her lips. and still, she drank. The sound was unmistakable. A long, slow, greedy swallowing, like a child suckling too fast, like a hunger that had waited too long. Lan pressed her hand over her mouth. The sound grew louder, wetter, and then a second sound joined it. Rock, creak, rock, creak. The cradle began to move again. This time she could see it. A shape, impossibly small, rose within, pale, boneless, like a shadow curled into the suggestion of a baby. It did not cry. It opened its mouth. Nothing else. The room pulsed once with cold. The woman turned again, and for the first time looked Lan directly in the eyes, and smiled. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't kind. It was a smile of purpose. "You're here." Lan could not speak. Her throat locked. The woman continued, her voice barely more than a breath. "He takes from those who offer. He never forgets the taste." Lan shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "He's not mine." The spirit cocked her head. "Then why did you come back?" The room grew darker. The hearth behind the woman flared with sudden light. Not fire, but something burning, a pale blue glow. Lan saw the truth. The woman wasn't alive. Her hands were black at the edges, like paper that had burned but never turned to ash. Her face shimmered, a veil of decay, trying to remember its shape. The child in the cradle opened its mouth wider. It was too wide, too round. No tongue, no teeth. Just need. Lan turned away, gasping. The woman's voice followed her. "He only needs a little. He never takes more than you give." The words clung to her skin like oil. Then the sucking sound stopped. Lan turned back. The figure was gone. The cradle was still, and the bowl, untouched on the floor, had curdled. White turned to yellow, thick, spoiled. But beside it, in the center of the dark wooden floor, was a wet handprint. Tiny, perfect, pressed flat as if a child had crawled toward her and paused. Lan didn't sleep. She sat outside the cottage steps until dawn, watching fog wind through the trees. The bowl remained behind her. The handprint had dried. By the time the sun rose, she walked to the old shrine at the edge of the forest, where moss grew between the stones, and spirits were still fed rice and salt by those too afraid to forget. There, she lit 3 sticks of incense and spoke aloud. Who was he? The air stirred, but no voice answered. Instead, the smoke curled toward her and wrapped around her hands. It was warm, and then she heard behind her a laugh, a child's, soft, short, familiar. She turned. No one. Only a patch of ground where milk had been spilled long ago, and no grass had grown back since. By midday, Lan returned to the cottage. The grave beneath the kitchen remained undisturbed, but something had changed. On the wall above the cradle, a name had been etched into the wood. It hadn't been there before. T. A name so simple, so small, almost forgotten. She touched the letters. They were fresh, still splintered around the edges. She whispered it aloud. T. The cradle rocked once. Lan stepped back. That evening, she walked into the village to speak with the midwife, one of the last elders who might remember anything clearly. Old Nyan sat beneath the banyan tree, weaving string into forgotten patterns. Her fingers moved like they had done so for 100 years. When Lan asked about the child, Nyan closed her eyes. "Mai's baby," she said, "not hers by blood. She found him in the field, barely alive. No mother came forward." "Was he buried?" Lan asked. She hesitated. "No, the temple refused him. No name, no rights, no family." Lan's voice cracked. "But he died." Nan nodded. "After 3 days. Never cried, never fed, just stared. And when he stopped breathing, your aunt didn't let go. She kept him warm, sang to him, and when her breasts began to fill..." She trailed off, eyes clouded. "She fed him?" Lan whispered. Nyan nodded once. "And every night after that, the milk was taken." That night, Lan returned with a choice. She would not run again. She would not pretend the house was empty. She prepared the milk slowly, warming it with cinnamon bark and a sliver of dried ginger, her grandmother's old recipe for sleep. She placed the bowl on the floor, sat beside it, and waited. At midnight, the hearth glowed faintly. The figure appeared, slow, pale, quiet. The woman, her aunt, bent low and held her hands as if cradling a baby. But this time, there was no pretense. Lan could see the child. T. His skin was gray as ash. His eyes were hollow. His mouth hung open. But in her arms he swayed, rocked, as if still alive. The spirit whispered, "He only drinks what is given freely." Lan nodded. She slid the bowl forward. As the child reached toward it, something inside Lan shifted, not fear, but pity. This was not a monster. It was a need, a hunger that had grown beyond death, and now it had found someone else to hold it.
Lan woke to the sound of something tapping inside the cupboard. Soft, rhythmic, like a tiny hand knocking politely from the inside. The morning light through the kitchen window was dull and colorless. The hearth was cold, and the bowl she'd left the night before still sat where it had been, emptied. Not spilled, not cracked, just licked clean. She rose, her limbs slow, heavy from another restless night, and crossed to the old cabinet. She hadn't touched it since arriving. The latch creaked, the hinges groaned, the smell of mildew and dust breathed out. Inside were jars, old, clouded with age. Most held dried roots, bits of bark, preserved petals from forgotten rituals. But one jar, pushed into the back corner and sealed with red wax, looked different. She pulled it out. The jar was packed full of uncooked rice. At first, she thought it was just that, stored food. But as she turned it, something shifted inside. Not a smooth movement, not the slide of grain. A weight, dense, uneven. Something hidden. She broke the seal and poured the rice out slowly onto the counter. And there it was, a doll. No bigger than her hand, made of clay, once painted red but now dulled to a sickly rust. Its head was too large for its body, its arms short, its feet pointed together like an offering statue. And its face was carved with a wide, gaping mouth. Not a child's grin, not even a scream, but something desperate, consuming. Lan leaned in. Inside the open mouth, something glittered.
She reached for a thin stick and nudged it gently. Something fell out onto the counter with a soft clink. A tooth. Tiny, blackened at the root, sharp. She shook the doll gently. Another fell, then another, until there were 7, each one the size of a grain of rice, each one real. Lan stared at them for a long time. Then she whispered, "What were you fed?" She took the doll to Mistress Han that afternoon. The elder sat in silence, turning it over in her wrinkled hands. She didn't speak for a long while. Then finally, "This is a vessel." Lan leaned forward. "For what?" The old woman looked up, eyes clouded but alert. "For a hunger too small to bury." She turned the doll's head slightly. "Clay offerings are made to house wandering spirits, especially ones too young to have names. They're meant to be buried or sealed. But this one," she traced the open mouth, "was kept." Lan's voice was hoarse. "Why put the teeth inside?" Mistress Han hesitated. "To keep him from biting." The words sat between them like a second silence. "He wasn't buried, was he?" "No," Han murmured. "Your aunt tried once, but the next morning he was back, lying on the floor as if he'd never been taken out. She thought she was mad. Then the milk began to disappear." Lan swallowed hard. "Why did she hide the doll?" "Because she was warned by the monk. He told her the child was becoming something else." "Becoming what?" The elder didn't answer. Instead, she handed the doll back to Lan and whispered, "If you break it, be sure to run." That night, Lan did not sleep. She sat in the center of the cottage with the doll before her, resting in a shallow dish of salt. The teeth were laid beside it in a neat row, each one blackened and sharp, as if still alive. She waited. At midnight, the room grew cold. But this time, no figure appeared, no woman, no cradle, only the doll. It trembled. Lan leaned in slowly. The mouth had changed, no longer open wide, but slightly closed, as if pursing. The crack down the center of its head widened slowly with a soft pop. And then, without warning, the teeth leapt from the floor and slid back into the mouth. 1, 2, 3. Lan cried out, backing away, her heel knocking over the salt dish. The doll rolled. Its mouth clicked shut. The room went still. But then a sound rose. Chew, chew, chew. Soft, wet. Lan screamed and slammed a bowl over it. The chewing stopped, but she could feel it, waiting. At dawn, she wrapped the doll in cloth and buried it beneath a stone behind the cottage. Not too deep. She didn't know why, but something told her it didn't want to be far. As she stood and brushed the dirt from her palms, she felt a strange warmth at her chest. She looked down. Milk had stained her shirt. Her breasts, untouched for a lifetime, had begun to weep. She ran to the riverbank, tearing her clothes off as she went. She stood waist-deep in the icy water, gasping, sobbing, trying to scrub her skin clean. But no matter how she washed, the milk kept coming. From her body, from her mind, from something deeper. She fell to her knees in the shallows and cried out, "He's not mine!" The wind answered, not with a whisper, with a gurgle, from beneath the water. She turned. Floating in the current was the doll, wet, smiling. Lan stumbled back in horror. but it drifted gently toward her, as if coming home. She wrapped it again and returned to the house, placed it on the table. She no longer had the strength to resist. That night, she sat by the hearth and watched as the cradle began to move. But this time, no ghost mother came. Only the shape of the child, T, rising from the shadows. He did not walk. He crawled, and with each movement he grew more formed. The clay hardened, the bones beneath the skin thickened, the hair, fine and white, began to grow in small patches. He reached the table, stared up at the doll, and smiled. Lan closed her eyes. In the dark, she whispered, "What do you want from me?" A small voice answered, not a scream, not a cry. "More." And the doll rocked gently, side to side.
The days passed slowly now. Lan no longer measured time by sun or meal or breath, only by the nights, only by the feedings. Each midnight, the air would thicken, the cradle would rock, and the child, or what wore the shape of one, would drink what was offered. Milk, warm, fragrant, sometimes sweetened with herbs. She brewed it without question now, without fear. Only fatigue remained, deep, rooted. She no longer questioned why her body gave milk. She no longer screamed when her breast swelled painfully in the late afternoons. This was simply what the house required. The village, meanwhile, had grown quieter. Not the usual hush of poverty or age, but a deeper silence, the kind that pressed against the throat like a hand. Lan noticed it first among the young women, their eyes hollow, their backs curved inward, their lips pale and trembling. At the well, she passed two new mothers, both cradling infants who would not latch. The babies cried in sharp, rasping bursts, mouths wide, fists clenched, rooting without success. One mother wept openly. The other clutched her breast and whispered, "There's nothing left." Lan watched them, her own chest heavy with milk she hadn't meant to make. She offered no words. But the oldest women watched her too, their eyes sharp, knowing. They did not speak to her anymore, but she saw them leaving small bundles at her gate. Dried herbs, fish bones, folded paper talismans. Some were meant to protect her. Others were meant to warn. That night, the child drank greedily. Lan sat by the hearth, her fingers trembling as she held the bowl. The cradle no longer needed rocking. It moved on its own now, swaying with the rhythm of thirst. And the child, T, had changed. His shape was more defined, his limbs longer, his eyes nearly formed, but his mouth, it had widened, stretched. The bowl, once enough, was no longer satisfying him. He finished it quickly, then stared at her, expectant, silent. Lan held her breath. "No," she said. But the child did not cry, did not wail. He only opened his mouth wider, and from the shadows something else stirred, a shape, thin and slithering, like an umbilical cord of mist. It reached toward her chest. Lan screamed and backed away. The cord retreated slowly, almost sadly. And then the child faded, leaving only the bowl behind, empty, cracked at the rim. Lan ran to Mistress Han the next morning.
She found the old woman sitting beneath a withered tree, crushing dried beetle leaves between her fingers. Lan dropped to her knees before her. "You knew," she whispered. The elder did not look at her. "I warned you," she said, "but you stayed." "He's growing." Han's face tightened. "Because you're feeding him." "I can't stop. He takes it from me even when I sleep." Now the old woman looked at her. Her voice was a slow, unraveling thread. "The curse does not begin with the feeding. It begins with the bond." Lan's heart sank. "What bond?" "You claimed him when you gave freely. That's all it takes. He remembers." I shook my head, near tears. "But he's not mine." "He is now, and he's hungry." The old woman told her the rest. During the famine, it wasn't just Mai who suffered. Other women lost their children. Others refused to help when Mai begged for milk or burial rites. They mocked her, called her mad. And then, slowly, their milk ran dry. Their babies wailed and withered. One by one, they buried their own sons and daughters, while Mai's house remained quiet. It was said the curse had twisted, not merely a hunger that needed feeding, but a hunger that punished others to ensure its own survival. A ghost child, yes, but also a parasite, drawing milk from the living, leaving them barren, starved. Lan covered her mouth. "Why didn't they stop it?" "They tried," she said. "One man set fire to the house. Another poisoned the milk. But each time the child returned, through dreams, through breath, through womb." "What do I do?" The old woman looked away. "Either you starve him and let him scream, or you feed him and lose yourself slowly." Lan stood in silence, the air between them thick with smoke and memory. Then Han added softly, "No one who fed him ever stayed alive, but none who refused ever stayed sane." That night, Lan did not boil the milk. She sat in the dark, alone. The cradle creaked, but she did not look. The air chilled. The shadow moved, but she kept her eyes closed. Then the smell came, not milk, but decay, like wet cloth left to rot in a sealed chest. Lan gagged. The child appeared, not walking, not crawling, but emerging, from shadow, from breath, from the cracks between boards. His body shimmered, not quite flesh, not quite mist. He opened his mouth. Lan whispered, "There's nothing left." The child made no sound, only opened wider, and then he reached, not with hands, but with hunger. The mist cord slid across the floor, curling up toward her lap. Lan bit down on her lip until it bled. "I said no." The cradle stopped rocking. A pause. Then the house groaned. The floorboards flexed. The air turned sour. And from the hearth the ghost of Mai appeared. Her eyes were weeping milk, her voice a lullaby torn apart. "You made him a promise." Lan trembled. "I never—" "You sang, you watched, you offered. That is enough." The child wailed then, once, high-pitched, piercing. Then, silence. The room emptied. The air cleared. But Nan knew it was not over. Only waiting. The next day, word spread. One of the newborns had died. Lan went to the house. The mother sat in the corner, rocking nothing in her arms. Her dress was soaked with milk that had never been drawn. The baby lay cold in a basket, mouth wide open, eyes glassy. Lan approached, heart breaking. But when she looked into the tiny mouth, she saw something inside. A line of teeth. Not the soft gums of infancy, but blackened, tiny, biting teeth. Lan turned and ran. She bathed in the river until dusk, scrubbed her body with salt and ginger, burned her clothes at the shore. But her breast still wept, and her dreams, they were full of suckling sounds.
The house no longer creaked. It breathed. Lan felt it when she stepped across the threshold, a quiet exhale that made the curtains sway, the shadows lean. She didn't light a candle. There was no need. She knew the dark now, knew where each object slept, where each sound waited. Her body was sore. Her chest ached, full again, throbbing beneath the fabric of her shirt. She had stopped binding herself. It was useless. The milk would come, with or without permission. She sat on the floor beside the hearth, knees to chest. The bowl remained empty beside her. She would not feed him tonight. She told herself that again and again, but her hands trembled. It was during the deep hush of the second hour past midnight that she heard it. Drip, drip. Not from outside, not from the roof, from the far cupboard. The old one, sealed shut by time and dust. Lan rose. Her feet made no sound. The house accepted her now. She belonged to it. The cupboard door resisted, then relented with a soft sigh. Inside, only one item. A bundle of old cloth pressed between two jars of dried plum bark. She reached in. The fabric crumbled in places, age and damp eating through its edges. But it held together enough for her to lift it. It was a swaddling cloth, worn, frayed, and stained. Milk white in some places, deep red in others. The blood had dried long ago, but the patterns it left still whispered. And embroidered at one corner with shaking, threadbare letters, T. She ran her fingers over the name. The thread was soft, too soft. And when she pressed harder, the embroidery began to weep. Tiny white beads of milk gathered at each letter, welling up like tears, then fell, slow and warm, onto her fingers. Lan gasped. The cloth grew heavier in her hands, warmer. She dropped it. It landed silently on the floor, folding in on itself like a sleeping body. And from within its folds came the sound. Suckle. Suckle. Gope. Lan stumbled back, heart racing, but her body responded. Her breasts throbbed, tightened, and then they leaked. Milk soaked through her shirt. The cloth twitched. Lan turned and fled from the kitchen, tears burning her eyes. But the sound followed her, not in the air, in her head. She slept by the door, curled like a child, but the dreams came anyway. In them, she was not herself. She was lying on the hearth, hair spread out like a halo, shirt open. The child lay against her chest, drinking, not screaming, not asking, just taking. His skin was cold, his fingers soft but wrong, like clay. He nuzzled closer, mouth sealed over her nipple. And as he drank, her vision blurred. The house around her changed. Time fell away. She saw Mai, younger, smiling, rocking the same child, humming gently. She saw the midwife, Nyan, turning away with sorrow. She saw herself again, sleeping, suckling, feeding something that would never be satisfied. She woke with a jolt, the door still shut, the hearth cold, but the swaddling cloth had followed her. It sat folded neatly at her feet, still damp, still warm. That day, Lan took the cloth to the river. She built a fire and placed it on the embers, watching it curl, blacken. But it did not burn. It smoked. It bled milk, but it would not turn to ash. Even when the flames licked its edges, the center stayed intact, name still visible. Tea. She plunged it into the river, held it beneath the surface with both hands. The water around it turned cloudy, white. The milk leached into the current, flowing downstream like a stain. When she pulled it back out, it was heavier than before, soaked but intact. And the name still wept. She brought it back to the village, to the shrine, laid it before the old altar where mothers once prayed for protection. She lit 3 sticks of incense, knelt, and whispered, "Take him back." But the wind blew the smoke away, and when she turned, the cloth was gone. Back at the house, it waited for her, folded, placed carefully inside the cradle, as if put there by a loving hand. That night, she did not fight. She boiled the milk, held the bowl with both hands, and waited. At midnight, the child came. Not crawling, not floating, walking, feet pale, silent. He reached the cradle and climbed in, curled beneath the cloth, opened his mouth. Lan brought the bowl forward. He drank. Long, slow. The sounds filled the house. Gulp, swallow, sigh. When he was done, he looked up. His eyes were nearly full now, black, empty, but not cruel, just tired. Lan reached forward, touched his hand. Cold, but small, real. She asked him, "Are you done?" He blinked slowly, then laid his head back. The cradle stilled, and for the first time, Lan heard a sound she had never heard before. A yawn, soft, human. The child was full, and sleep came. Lan sat by the hearth until dawn, her body aching, her heart strangely calm. And when the sun rose, the milk stopped. For the first time in days, her chest felt light, dry. The cloth remained in the cradle, still, at peace.
The village did not sleep. It pretended. Lan noticed it first in the way the lights dimmed, not when the sun fell, but precisely an hour before dusk. Lanterns lowered, windows shuttered. Children called indoors with hurried hands, not scoldings. The air at that time changed, grew heavy, like breath held beneath water, like guilt soaked into stone. And behind every closed door, silence. Not rest, not peace, silence. The kind that trembles behind locked mouths. Lan walked the empty streets one evening, just before the sky fully darkened. Her footsteps echoed across the red clay path like a warning. The old tea house was boarded up now. The temple had no incense burning, and at the midwife's door, someone had nailed a talisman, black ink on yellow paper, smeared with red fingerprints. She reached the schoolhouse at the edge of the village. Its roof sagged. Vines crept through its broken windows. No child had entered in years. Inside, dusk clothed every surface, but the ledgers remained, stacked high, forgotten. Lan wiped her hand across a ledger cover. The word births was faded beneath layers of ash and mildew. She opened it. The pages were ordered by year, line after line of careful entries, names, weights, dates, proud scribbles in the margins. But then, a blank page. No births for that year, nor the next, nor the next. Her fingers flipped faster. She counted 9 years with no entries, then 3 children born in a single year, then silence again. 9-year intervals, each time broken by a short, thin breath of life, then silence again. Lan's hand trembled. She flipped the ledger further back and saw the notes from the famine year. A scribbled margin, hastily written. Child found in outer field. No name, no guardian. Buried without right. Returned. The word returned was underlined. Twice. Lan left the schoolhouse in a daze, clutching the page she'd torn free. That night, she sat beside the cradle again. The swaddling cloth was empty. Tea did not come. Only the silence did. It spread through the house like smoke, coiling into the corners, settling beneath the floorboards. And from that silence, a hum, not a lullaby, a chant, from outside. She stood. The sound came from the forest edge. She followed it, barefoot. Branches parted around her as though moved by unseen hands. And there, among the trees, she found them. The women, the elders, the midwives, the widows, kneeling in a circle, around a bowl. Inside it, milk, still warm. Each woman had placed something beside it, a lock of hair, a child's shoe, a pinch of powdered root. Offerings. Their heads were bowed. Lan did not speak. They did not look up. But one voice rose in the dark. Old Mistress Han. He must not go hungry. Afterward, she confronted Han in the garden behind the temple ruins. Lan held out the torn page. You knew it. She did not deny it. Her fingers worked silently, tying dried leaves with red thread. Lan's voice broke. The births, they stopped. The curse spreads. Han nodded. Because we let it live. Why? The old woman looked at her, eyes wet with memory. Because the scream was worse than the silence. Lan stepped back, horrified. "You fed it!" "We all did once, some with milk, some with guilt. But we learned he doesn't stop asking, not until someone gives enough." "Enough of what?" The old woman did not answer, but her silence said everything. That night, Lan waited with no milk in the bowl. The cradle creaked. Tea appeared, smaller again, hungry. His eyes deeper, mouth wider. He reached for the bowl, found it empty, then looked at her and wept. The sound tore through her, not loud, not sharp, but raw, a grief that had no age, no beginning, no end, just need. Lan knelt beside him. "I don't know how to stop this." The child wept harder. Lan opened her arms. He crawled into them, curled against her chest, and in the dark, she held him, rocked him, sang nothing, only let the silence move through them both, and from his mouth, no teeth, only breath. For now.
Lan awoke to the wetness again, but this time not on her chest, lower. She sat up slowly, disoriented in the thick morning haze. Her thighs were damp, her abdomen tight, her skin fevered. The sheets beneath her were stained, not red, not white, but a thin, pale yellow. Milk. Not from above, from within. She stood, unsteady, and pressed her hand to her lower belly. It pulsed. Once, then stopped. She staggered to the basin and poured cool water over herself, scrubbing with leaves and ash. But the ache in her womb remained, dull, deep, familiar and yet foreign. Not pain, memory. As if her body had learned something it was never meant to know. Later that day, she visited the village healer. Madame Beach, once a midwife, now rarely spoke. She spent her days weaving charms from banana fiber and lighting incense for infants who never breathed. Lan asked her the question she'd never said aloud. What happens when your body believes it's a mother, but never was? Beach looked at her for a long time, then handed her a folded piece of cloth, embroidered not with a name, but a symbol, a circle with a drop falling from its center. Womb-binding charm, but not to prevent life, to hold back what was never yours. Lan held it tightly. I feel him inside me, like a dream that's learned how to breathe. The old woman only nodded. You have become the cradle. That night, Lan could not lie down. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt him stir beneath her skin, not kicking, but stretching, like smoke filling a sealed room, like a name trying to write itself in blood. She boiled no milk, made no offering, and yet the child came. Tea stood by the hearth, silent, watching. He did not cry, but her body reacted. Her breasts tingled, her belly coiled. He took one step closer. Lan whispered, "Stop." The child tilted his head, eyes dark, empty. And then he opened his mouth, not to drink, to speak. But the voice that came was not his. You carried me once in a place beyond time, in hunger, in death. Lan's knees buckled. She fell to the floor, clutching her stomach. Inside her, warmth, movement, a curl of life that was not life, a memory growing limbs. She crawled to the mirror near the corner and pulled her shirt up. Her belly had changed. No swelling, no bruise, but etched beneath the skin, faint as if traced by finger in sleep, was the shape of a hand, tiny, reaching outward. She pressed her palm over it. It vanished. She screamed. At dawn, she left the cottage and went to the edge of the forest. There, where the trees curved like ribs, she built a fire and swallowed smoke. She chanted no words. She spoke no name, but her tears fell freely into the embers, and still her womb ached, not with sorrow, with expectation, as if something waited, not to be born, to be remembered. The next day, the midwife's youngest apprentice found Land crouched by the shrine, eyes wide, lips moving, singing, but not to herself, to the soil. The apprentice fled. That evening, 3 villagers came to her door, none with gifts, none with threats, just a single request. Do not let him inside you. Lan laughed softly. Too late. She returned to the schoolhouse and searched the ledgers again, not for names, but for gaps. Blank lines where a mother's name was listed, but no child beneath. One such page caught her breath. Mai, Lan's aunt. Age, 25. Pregnancy, suspected. Outcome, no record. Another entry, different year. Lan's mother, age 19. Outcome, stillbirth. No remains recovered. Lan stepped back, spine cold. Not one mother, 2, 3, more. He had returned before, again and again, and now her. That night, she dreamed she was giving birth. No midwife, no fire, only her on the kitchen floor, legs trembling, cradled in smoke. The cradle beside her rocked on its own. Her belly split, not with pain, but opening, and from within, not a child, but a shadow. It rose, pulsing, flickering like firelight, and stepped into the cradle, curled itself inside, and slept. When Lan woke, she was bleeding milk from her navel. She tried to end it, boiled bitter herbs, swallowed salt, carved his name into rice paper and burned it with ash. She screamed at the hearth, "Leave me!" But the air only whispered back, "You are the vessel." At midnight, the cradle rocked once more. The child sat up, stared at her, and this time smiled, real, human. And in that smile, Lan saw not malice, but claim, not possession, but recognition. She sat down across from him, placed her hand over her stomach, felt the warmth return, a beat, a pulse, a memory still being born.
The dreams were no longer hers. Lan did not wander in them anymore. She watched. Each night, she stood in the corner of her own house, unseen, unheard, unmoving. And in the center of the room, beside the cradle, sat a woman, not always clear, not always whole, but always familiar. Her aunt, Mai. She sat as if waiting for something to begin, legs folded, back straight, hair falling like curtains over her shoulders. And then she began to sing, not in words, not in voice, but in rhythm. Her lips moved, but no sound came from her mouth. Instead, the walls sang, the floor hummed, the rafters trembled with the memory of lullaby. It was a song that didn't end, only paused, waiting for a mouth to carry it again. And Lan, though silent in the dream, found her tongue moving as if echoing each note.
She awoke with the taste of milk in her mouth, her lips damp, her tongue sticky, and beside her bed, the cradle had moved. It now stood at the head of her mattress, closer, watching her while she slept. She thought perhaps she had sung aloud, so that evening she sat in the farthest corner of the house and placed a string of dried betel over her mouth before she slept, an old charm. It was said the leaves would curl and blacken if the mouth spoke while asleep. When morning came, the leaves were gone. Only a fine white powder remained on her pillow. Milk dust, faint, sweet. She had sung again. Lan walked into the village that day. Faces turned, not with curiosity, with recognition. They no longer asked if she needed help. They knew what she had become. At the market, a small boy pointed at her belly and said, "Baby ghost." His mother slapped his hand, but she did not deny it. She went to the temple ruins, where moss had eaten the names from the stones. There she sang aloud, soft, unsure, but the melody came easily, not from memory, from inheritance. Her voice lilted in the old rhythm, rising and falling like breath in a cradle. As she sang, the crows fell silent, the wind stilled, and the moss at her feet turned wet. That night, she awoke gasping, the song still in her throat. She stood by the window, tears on her cheeks. Outside, across the fog-soaked hill, dozens of candles flickered in the dark. Lan leaned closer to the glass. Each candle sat in front of a door. Each door belonged to a house with no child. The village was singing again, without sound, without consent, only repetition. Lan began to lose time. She'd wake in the morning and find her sheets changed, floor swept, milk warmed, the cradle emptied. She would check her fingers and find them wet, check her mouth and taste sweetness, and her voice, hoarse, used. Each day she grew quieter while the house grew louder. One morning she found something strange, a piece of cloth nailed to the wall above the cradle. Not by her hand. It was old, tattered, but embroidered in blood-red thread. She sings with borrowed tongue. She stared at it for a long time. She didn't remember sewing. She didn't remember nailing. But her fingers were calloused, sore. She pulled the cloth down and held it to her chest. Her heart beat fast beneath it. Familiar, like a drum her body had always known how to play. She returned to Mistress Han. The elder listened in silence as Lan explained. When she finished, she took her hand and whispered, "The lullaby doesn't belong to your aunt anymore." Lan frowned. "Then who?" The old woman paused. "Then, you." Lan asked the question she'd been afraid to voice. "Is this how it happens? The passing?" The old woman's eyes were tired. She said, "It's not past, it's grown, like a vine over bones. You were the next root, the next voice." Lan whispered, "Can I stop it?" The old woman looked away, and Lan knew the answer. That night, she did not wait for sleep. She sat before the hearth and sang aloud, not the lullaby, not at first, but her own name, again and again, trying to remember the sound of it. But by the third breath,
Her tongue betrayed her. The lullaby returned, slow, tender, a melody full of rot. Her lips moved without permission. Her eyes wept, but the cradle rocked softly, as if soothed. She dreamed she was her aunt, her hands older, her voice familiar, the house warm. She sang to the child, and the child drank. She held him close, and in that moment loved him, not in fear, not in madness, but in the only way a woman could love something that should never have been born, by pretending it was. She awoke with his name on her lips. Tea. The house was silent, but the cradle had moved again, now placed directly beside the stove, where the milk warmed faster, where the fire hummed in rhythm, where the house could listen. Lan sat down beside it and whispered, "What do you want from me?" The shadows answered with her own voice, singing, not from her throat, from the walls, from the cradle, from inside.
Lan stood in the forest at dusk, barefoot in soil soaked with stories. She had spent the morning harvesting in silence, collecting herbs not for healing, but for cutting. Ngai then to break bonds, Gung Zai to burn old memory, Za Ngai to sour the mouth of spirits. She carried them in a woven pouch close to her heart, knowing that once mixed they would become an offering the house could not welcome. And perhaps, just perhaps, neither could he. The village said nothing as she passed. A few doors opened slightly. One old man crossed himself, but did not meet her gaze. Mistress Hein stood beside her shuttered window and watched. Lan paused at the threshold of the cottage. The cradle was already rocking. She had not stepped inside, yet it knew. The house creaked. Floorboards swelled. The scent of milk greeted her like breath, but this time she did not tremble. She stepped through the threshold and said aloud, "Tonight you drink what ends this." She moved with practiced hands, pouring the milk slowly, gently adding the herbs, stirring sunwise 3 times. The steam rose bitter, acrid, unfamiliar. The house groaned. She placed the bowl on the hearthstone, where warmth still lingered, but fire had not burned in days. The cradle stopped. The room quieted. Even the air held its breath. At midnight, the child came, not crawling, not walking. He slid from shadow, shape unraveling as he moved, part child, part silence, part grief. Dee stood before the hearth and stared at the bowl, then turned to her and did not smile. Lan's voice trembled. "It's still milk, still warm." He tilted his head and for the first time sniffed. A sound like wind passing over bone. He stepped back. His mouth opened, not to drink, to scream. But no sound came. Instead, the walls wept. From every crack, every beam, milk oozed, thin, gray, sour. The house recoiled. Floorboards buckled. The window shutters snapped shut. Lan stood firm. "You will not take from me again." The child's form flickered, not growing weaker, but changing. His skin stretched, his limbs lengthened, his eyes receded, and from his mouth, teeth, black, many, waiting. The swaddling cloth burst into flame on its own, a thin blue fire that danced but did not spread. From the hearth, the ashes of old lullabies twisted into the air, forming shapes. A woman, a cradle, a breast, a child. The same story, again and again, until they burned away into nothing. Lan reached for the bowl and lifted it toward the child. "Drink!" Dee stared, but did not move. She stepped forward. 1 pace, 2. Then he hissed. Not like a beast, like steam meeting blood. The cradle tipped. Lan dropped the bowl. It shattered. The milk spilled, sizzling as it soaked into the hearthstone. The herbs turned black, and the child vanished. Silence returned. Not peace, not surrender, only the pause before hunger takes new shape. Lan fell to her knees, breathing in smoke and sourness. The house groaned around her, not in anger, in disappointment. A cracked voice filled the room, not from her throat, from beneath the floor. "You offered with fear, not love." She whispered, "I have nothing left." Then he waits. That night the house did not sleep. The windows dripped, the walls sagged, the air pulsed like a wounded lung, and the cradle, it rocked. Not by ghost, not by hand, by will. Lan awoke near dawn with ash on her tongue. The herbs she'd burned had returned, scattered in a ring around her body as if spat back. She opened her palm. In it, a single black tooth, still warm, still sharp, still growing. She buried it beneath the roots of the tamarind tree, where the soil refused to take seed. But as she turned to leave, the wind carried a sound that broke her. A lullaby, not hers, a chorus. The village was singing again, in their dreams, in their bones, not aloud, but known. That evening she went to the old well near the edge of the bamboo grove, where her aunt had first found the child. She stared into the depths. Her reflection was not her own. The face looking back had her eyes, yes, but her aunt's smile, and a baby's mouth, open, waiting. Lan screamed. The wind swallowed it whole. Back at the house, the hearth was lit, not by her. The fire danced blue. The cradle stood still, and beside it, a second one, smaller, newer, made from the branches she had stacked outside. It had not been there before. Lan stared at it, then at the warmth rising in her belly again, and whispered, "How many?" No answer came, only the faint sound of milk boiling in a pot she had not touched.
The fire would not die. Lan had tried, twice, throwing water on the hearth, covering the embers in ash. But the flames burned blue, steady, silent, like memory that refused to be forgotten. The second cradle remained by the wall,
untouched. She hadn't built it. Yet it stood with the shape of her hands, the bend of her breath, the curve of her bones. The house knew her now. It had accepted her. And in return, it began to mirror her. That night she lay in bed without sleep. The lullaby didn't come from her lips, it came from the walls. A low hum sung without sound. Her bones vibrated with it. She closed her eyes and fell, not into sleep, but inheritance. In the dream, she was sitting in the center of the house. The cradles circled her. 3, 4, 7, all empty. But something moved beneath each blanket. Breath, weight, shape. She reached into one, pulled back the cloth. A face, not twisted, not monstrous, her own, tiny, unformed, staring back, eyes like wet stone, mouth open, no sound. Then, bite. Lan gasped. Blood bloomed from her finger, running in a perfect ring. The baby grinned. Black teeth, all of them, filed, waiting. She woke with her hand clutched tight to her chest. Her palm ached. She opened it. Inside, a tooth. Small, still warm, still wet. She dropped it onto the floor. It bounced once, then spun, coming to rest facing upward, as if watching her. The cradle rocked slowly. No wind moved it. Lan rose, crossed the room, stared into the blanket. No child, only the cloth, stained at the center with milk, and something darker beneath. She touched it. The stain pulsed. She stepped back. In the mirror she saw herself, hair tangled, eyes hollow, and on her cheek a smear, milk. She wiped it away, but it remained. She scrubbed harder. No use. The milk wasn't on her. It was part of her. She went into the forest at dawn, barefoot, carrying the tooth wrapped in red silk. She dug beneath the stone at the shrine and buried it there. She whispered, "You will not come from me." The wind replied, "But I already have." Back at the cottage, the second cradle was gone. In its place, a chair, shaped from twisted wood, small, delicate, made for watching. Lan sat in it, and from the ceiling above, a drop of milk fell to her lap. She looked up. A tooth clung to the rafter. How it reached there, she didn't ask. That night, the dream returned. She was nursing, the baby against her chest, drinking with soft gulps. But this time she looked down and saw her own face again, older, weeping. It stared back, mouth full of dark teeth. "Thank you, Mother." Lan tried to pull away, but her arms no longer listened. She rocked, sang, smiled, and wept. When she woke, her mouth was bleeding. A tooth had fallen from her own jaw. She held it in shaking hands. It was hers, but black and small. She dropped it beside the others, 6 now, like a circle forming.
like a mouth learning how to eat. She returned to Mistress Han with the teeth in a bowl. The old woman did not look surprised, only tired. Lan asked, "What is he becoming?" The elder whispered, "A vessel for the ones who fed him. Each time he drinks, he remembers. He shapes himself from their grief." Lan stared. "From me?" Mistress Han nodded. "He wears your face now, because he is almost full." Lan's hands trembled. "What happens when he is?" The elder closed her eyes. "Then he births you, not into life, into ritual." Lan left without speaking. Her stomach turned, not from sickness, but from weight. Inside, movement, not life, but echo, like breath trying to form language. She boiled no milk that night, but the hearth still glowed, and the house began to hum. The lullaby came from the floor now, deep, low, cracked. She sat on the chair, watched the cradle. It rocked. Something rose inside it. Lan stood and froze. The child had returned, but not small, no longer soft. His eyes matched hers, his hands the same scars, and his mouth smiling. No longer wide, just right. He opened it. Inside, a single perfect tooth, still black, still wet. Lan fell to her knees. "What are you?" The child whispered, "I am what you carried when you thought you were empty."
The sun rose pale, as if too tired to shine. Lan stood barefoot on the porch of the old cottage, staring into the fog-covered fields where the village lay hushed. No birds sang, no wind stirred, only the sound of milk simmering over low fire. Inside, the cradle did not rock. It waited. The child had not returned since the night before, but Lan felt him, not behind walls, within. She had stopped bleeding days ago. Her body had grown still. No hunger, no thirst, only rhythm. She moved like one who had done this before, though she hadn't. She boiled the milk, sang the lullaby under her breath. Her voice no longer sounded like her own. It had grown rounder, heavier, worn smooth like a river stone. She set the bowl down on the hearthstone. The second cradle returned in the night, no longer empty. The blanket rose and fell with breath, faint, shallow. Lan sat beside it, whispered, "You are full now." But the child did not answer. He only slept. His face, her face, neither and both, a mirror of every woman who had ever fed him, a shape born from grief and repetition. And Lan was now the last shape, the final vessel. The villagers stood beyond the tree line, watching, not daring to cross the field. They had felt it, last night's silence. No crying, no creaking, no hunger, only stillness. They saw the smoke rise from the chimney, and for the first time in years, they did not pray to keep him away. They prayed he had stayed. Mistress Hand lit incense at the shrine. Her hands trembled. She whispered, "May she be enough." The wind carried her words uphill, toward the cottage.
and the lullaby returned, airily audible, like a hum in the soil. Inside, Land lifted the child from the cradle. He was light, his body warm but cooling. No breath, no bite, only weight, the weight of memory. She cradled him against her chest and rocked forward and back, forward and back. She sang until her voice frayed. She closed her eyes and felt the final pull of sleep. Not hers, his. The fire burned lower. Milk spilled across the hearthstone, pooling at her bare feet. Her lips moved once more. Sleep now. And the house exhaled. The walls loosened. The cradle stilled. The teeth, once scattered, were gone, returned, buried in silence. The villagers waited until dusk before approaching. The first to enter was a mother who had lost 3 sons. She found Lan seated by the hearth, still, eyes closed, child in her arms. Both asleep, both smiling faintly. The milk had curdled in the bowl, but no sourness clung to the air, only warmth. They did not wake her. They covered her with a shawl and placed the second cradle beside her. The child inside was no longer visible, only a shape beneath the cloth, still, content. From that night on, the village slept again. No crying from the hills, no midnight rocking. The births returned, slowly, cautiously. The women whispered fewer prayers. The shrine was cleaned, offerings of milk left untouched, and the cradle remained still. But on the coldest nights, when the fog pressed too close, some said they still heard the faint sound of a lullaby. Not from the cottage, from beneath the earth. A hum, a breath, a song sung without words. And the air would taste faintly sweet, like milk. In the cradle, wrapped in cloth faded by time, a single object remained. A black tooth, polished, placed where the mouth would be. But it never bit, it only slept. As she did, as they all did. At last.